I work at an old country pub with a deeply disturbing past. Over a century ago, it was home to a quiet farming family. One winter night, a stranger knocked on their door. She said she was lost, caught in the cold, and asked if she could stay until morning. The family welcomed her in, fed her, and told her that she could sleep by the fire. After dinner, the eldest son went out to check on the cattle. When he returned in the early hours of the morning, there were soiled footprints tracked all over the floor, and through the silence, he heard a thin, fragile tune coming from upstairs. He followed the sound up the narrow staircase and into the master bedroom. That's where he found them. His parents, his siblings, all dead, their bodies tucked neatly under their sheets, their arms folded across their chests, like someone had put them to sleep. A music box sat on the nightstand, its tiny crank still turning as it played a lullaby. The eldest son was inconsolable. His grief turned to fury. He tracked the stranger down and hanged her from a tree. The way the family had been arranged, the soft music playing in the silence, it earned the stranger the name Lullaby Lady. But it doesn't end there. There's also an urban legend that says you can summon the ghost of the killer. All you have to do is stand at the top of the stairs with the lights off and say these words: "Lullaby Lady, swinging from a tree, come this way, you don't scare me," and then turn your back to the staircase. If you do this, a dark shadow is said to climb the stairs and stand directly behind you. Now that you know that freaky little legend, I think that you're ready to hear my story. What I'm about to tell you is not for the faint-hearted, but I need to get it off my chest. And if you think it's all bollocks, then that's fine too. Preferable even. After all, I don't really want to believe it myself. Well, this one night we were closing up the pub, the same as always, cashing up and cleaning down. By the time the last stool was flipped, it was just four of us, treating ourselves to a few stolen pints. We got talking about ghost stories, and obviously that tale about the Lullaby Lady was brought up. Tasha didn't buy a word of it. Her default mode is loud and cocky, and she said that she'd prove that it was all rubbish. We wandered off to the back of the pub where the original house still stood. There had been extensions and modifications since, but this part was untouched due to its heritage. It even had the same staircase from the story. Tasha didn't hesitate. She went straight up, each step creaking under her weight. The rest of us stayed at the bottom, watching. She said the words, loud and clear: "Lullaby Lady, swinging from a tree, come this way, you don't scare me." She turned away to face the landing, allowing the silence to draw out as the wind battered the side of the old house. Then she took a step back, her breathing becoming more rapid, as if she had seen something, before spinning around and screaming down the stairs at us with a big idiot grin on her face, trying to make us all jump. To be fair, it was a good attempt, and Greg was so startled that he let out a massive fart, and Tasha was in hysterics. A few days passed, and I was back at work on a particularly busy shift. It wasn't until later that evening that I noticed Tasha. Truth be told, she was normally a bit of a bellend, overly assertive and brash, but she was being uncharacteristically quiet and timid. I found her in the cellar at the end of the night. I'd gone down to fit another keg, and she was standing in the middle of the room, stock forgotten around her. Up close she looked absolutely shattered, like she hadn't slept in days. I asked her what was wrong. She wouldn't even look at me. I was about to let it go, leave her alone and get back to work, when she spoke. She said she'd started seeing things at night. The way she said it made the hairs on my arm stand up. She looked scared, properly scared, and I'd never seen her like that before. Then, cautiously, she tells me more about it. It started the night after she'd been on the staircase in the pub, after she'd done the Lullaby Lady rhyme. She'd gone home, gone to bed like normal, but as she turned off the lights and stood at the top of her own stairs, she saw something, a figure ambling about at the bottom. She said it was too dark to see clearly, and by the time she turned the light back on, it was gone. She said the next night was worse. She woke up in the early hours of the morning, convinced she'd heard something. She said that there was a creak on the stairs, then another, like someone was sneaking up them, slowly. She said she lay there in bed, frozen stiff, but it was last night that had been the most terrifying. She woke again in the small hours, this time to whispering right outside her bedroom. She said the things being said were just awful. When she finally opened the door, there was no one there. She said she thought she was losing it, and quite frankly, she sounded absolutely bonkers, but I tried to comfort her as best I could. I told her that it was her mind playing tricks on her. It happens when you're tired. Once you believe something to be true, you start hearing it and seeing it everywhere. She looked at me hopefully and nodded her head. I felt bad for her. She wasn't the type to scare easily, and I could see that this was eating her up alive. I just wanted to help, to prove to her that none of it was real, so I did the only thing I could think of. I told her we'd go back to the stairs, and I'd do the rhyme myself to show her that there was nothing to be afraid of. She didn't argue. Maybe she didn't have the energy to. We went to the back of the pub where the stairs were. Tasha stayed at the bottom while I went to the top. When I looked down at her, she looked so little. She was staring at her feet with her arms wrapped around herself, like she was trying to stop herself from shaking. In that moment I felt uneasy, but I didn't want to back down for Tasha's sake. Then I said the words, "Lullaby Lady, swinging from a tree, come this way, you don't scare me." Then I turned my back to the stairs like Tasha had done, and waited ample time to satisfy her that the ritual had been performed. Then I turned around and went back down. I told her again it was just a story, something her mind had latched onto, and she smiled weakly back at me. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. At some point in the night, I woke up needing the bathroom. The house was dark, quiet, and familiar. It was on my way back to my room that I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of a pale face looking up at me from the bottom of the stairs. I stopped mid-step and stared at the spot where I'd seen it, but it was gone. The next day it was pouring down outside, and the rain was drumming against the house. I was in my room, snuggled up with a blanket and reading a book, when I heard footsteps on the stairs. The weight and movement of each tread unmistakable, like someone was carefully ascending. My dad worked shifts, and he usually came home around that time, so I didn't think much of it and went back to what I was doing. It wasn't until about half an hour later that I heard the front door open and close, followed by the sound of Dad's boots in the hallway. I was majorly confused. I was convinced I just heard him in the house with me. It was creepy, but with the rain and all that, I told myself it could have just been the sounds of the house. That evening, I had a shift at the pub. Tasha was already there, and was back to her usual self, loud and cocky. It was as if the past few days hadn't even happened. She looked fine, better than fine actually. When I finally got a chance to talk to her, I told her about the strange things that had been happening to me. She frowned, as if she didn't understand. Then she laughed and rolled her eyes, telling me it was all in my head, the same way it had been in hers. She said she had been tired, stressed, seeing and hearing things, but she'd slept like a baby the last couple of nights. It was all good. I felt like I was in the middle of a breakdown and she was fobbing me off, as if she hadn't been pissing her pants a few nights earlier. Anyway, I left work more agitated than ever, and that night I woke up with a start, though I didn't know why. The room felt weird as I lay on my side. Then I heard it. Tinny, metallic music. A lullaby. Hush-a-bye baby. It was somewhere out on the landing. My body wouldn't respond. My arms, my legs, everything felt pinned, like some invisible force was holding me down. Then the sounds get closer, and it's like someone is whispering, with their mouth pushed up against the door. The handle of my bedroom door starts to turn, slow and deliberate, the way someone might turn it if they didn't want to be heard, or if they were trying to scare you, to draw out the fear. Then the door opens a crack, revealing a slither of darkness. I couldn't do a thing about it. I couldn't even blink. Then a pale face of a scraggly female emerged. Her eyes locked on me like she knew exactly where I was. She grinned, and it was the grin that made my chest seize up. There was nothing kind about it. It was the grin of someone who'd been caught watching and didn't care. The room started to tilt. I tried to scream, tried to move, but nothing worked. Then everything went black. The next thing I knew, I was upright in my bed, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The room was still dark, still quiet, but the mood had lifted. I was sweating, my sheets tangled around me. I sat there, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen. It didn't. I told myself it was a nightmare, but I didn't close my eyes for a long time. I just lay there, terrified. I started to feel like a fool for trying to reassure Tasha. I should have never said that stupid rhyme at the top of the stairs. What if whatever had been following her had now somehow jumped onto me? The next day, I had a 12-hour shift, and I was so bloody tired I could barely function. To make things worse, we had a new starter called Ben. I was supposed to train him, show him the ropes. I didn't want to. I was in no fit state, but I couldn't exactly say no. Ben was fine. He asked questions, did what he was told, and seemed like a nice guy. At break, he sat across from me in the staff room and attempted some small talk. My mind was elsewhere, stuck on that pale, haggard face at my bedroom door. At some point, I found myself staring at him, and a thought crept into my head. It was stupid, horrible even, but I couldn't let it go. What if I could pass this on to someone else, just like I'd caught it from Tasha? I hated myself for thinking it, but I was desperate. I wanted it gone. When Ben stopped talking, I forced a smile and, trying to sound as casual as possible, told him about the history of the pub and the story of the Lullaby Lady. Then I made up something about how there was an initiation ritual for new starters. Made out to him that it was just a bit of fun, nothing serious, something stupid the staff do to freak each other out. I thought I sounded fake as hell, but Ben didn't seem to notice. He grinned and said he'd do it. It was that easy. I felt like a real piece of shit. Later that night, Ben did the ritual without hesitation. I patted him on the shoulder and forced a laugh that sounded almost real. The relief I felt was amazing. It was done. Whatever had been after me, it wasn't my problem anymore. We went back to the others, who were still cleaning up the bar. Ben made light of the situation and said he was going to put out some milk and cookies for the Lullaby Lady, and they all joined in joking around with him about it. Then the manager came in. I noticed him as soon as he stepped in through the back door. He looked wrong, like something heavy was pulling down on him. He wasn't alone. 2 police officers followed him inside. The manager cleared his throat to get our attention and told us all to listen. One of the officers took over. His voice was steady, low, rehearsed. He told us there had been a tragic incident. Tasha had been found dead. He hesitated, just for a moment. His eyes flickered down before he spoke again. They couldn't go into detail, but it looked as if someone else had been involved. They said they were here to take statements. Just routine, they said. Everyone was left stunned. Ben just stared at the floor, his face blank. Must have been one hell of a first shift, but none of them felt what I felt. I was thinking about all the things Tasha had told me, the fear in her voice, the way she'd looked at me in the cellar, her eyes darting over her shoulder like she could feel something there. The officer's voice carried on, words flattening into meaningless sounds, and somewhere, far away in the back of my mind, I could almost hear it, a tinny little music box cranking out a metallic tune, and someone singing, "Lullaby Lady, swinging from a tree, come this way, you don't scare me."